Hi, this is Miss Fazone, and this is pre-calculus, and this is the special rate triangles. So there are two triangles that are we call special because we know a lot more about them than most triangles. So the first is what kind of triangle is this? It's a right triangle, and look, what's the deal with the angles? They're the same. So this is your isosceles right triangle. So remember, when you have an isosceles triangle, two angles are the same, so 45, 45. If we make both of these sides 1 and do with the Pythagorean theorem, you get radical 2. Okay. So what I want to do is find sine, cosine, and tangent. So you can honestly just pick, since they're the same, we can pick any angle we want. I always like this one. So let's label our SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. All right. So where's your hypotenuse? That's your radical 2. Opposite. It actually doesn't matter because these are both 45. The opposite and adjacent are the same. All right, so what is sine of 45 degrees? Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So the opposite side is 1. The hypotenuse is radical 2. Now we are going to rationalize. Mathematicians like it when your denominator is rationalized. So let's do that. So when you have a radical on the bottom, you multiply the top and bottom by it. 1 times radical 2 is radical 2. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is 2. So you get radical 2 over 2. Cosine of 45 is adjacent over hypotenuse. The adjacent's 1. The hypotenuse is radical 2, so you end up getting the same thing. Radical 2 over 2. And tangent of 45. Tan is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite is 1. Sorry, opposite over adjacent. Opposite is 1, adjacent is 1. So 1 over 1, which is just 1. Okay. So this is just the first piece of our table. I would say not to write this down because I'm going to give you a big table later. So notice these are like exact answers. Typically when we find sine of 57 or something weird, it's a gross decimal that we don't really have a good way of figuring out. These are special because we have exact answers. We know sine of 45 is radical 2 over 2. That's not an estimate at all. That's the exact answer, unlike most other triangles. Okay? All right. The second special triangle is your 30, 60, 90. Okay? Now I'm giving you these. You can look online, or if you really want to know where everything comes from, you can come see me after school, but I don't really want to get into that in class. All right. So let's start with 30 degrees. Let's start with 60, actually. So let's do sine, cosine, and tan of 60. All right. So sine of 60, cosine of 60, tan of 60. Okay, so let's start with those. So we have to label. Our hypotenuse is 2. Now, since we're dealing with 60, this is the angle. Pretend that 30 isn't even there for a second, okay? So opposite is radical 3. Adjacent is 1, right? So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So radical 3 over 2. Okay. Can you see? Cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse, 1 over 2. And tan is opposite over adjacent, radical 3 over 1, which is just radical 3. Do not leave that radical 3 over 1, guys. That irritates me. Anything divided by 1 is itself. All right. All right. So that's your cosine that's your sine, cosine, tan is 60. Now we're going to do the 30. Okay. So what happens when we do 30? What do we have to do to our triangle that we just labeled? We have to fix it. What changes? Oopsies. Where's my eraser? Opposite and adjacent end up switching because we're not labeling from the 60 anymore, right? Now, Now I don't care about the 60, I care about 30, right? So now where's my opposite? Now my opposite, what's across from 30? Across from 30 is your 1. This becomes your opposite. This becomes your adjacent. So they end up switching, right? So what's cosine? Wow, I can't speak right now. What is your sine of 30? So opposite over hypotenuse. So 1 over 2. Cosine of 30. Adjacent over hypotenuse, radical 3 over 2. So notice those just switched. Tan of 30 is a little more complicated because what's tan of 30? Opposite over adjacent. So 1 over radical 3. And again, we're going to rationalize. So times radical 3 times radical 3. Radical 3 over 3. Okay? All right. So this is what we know so far, right? I'm actually going to give you a bigger table with a little bit more information, okay? All right, so sine of 0. Now, these I didn't fill in. We're going to go through why these are the case at a later date. I just want to give them to you so you can learn them. Sine of 0 is 0. Cosine of 0 is 1. Tan of 0 is 0. 90 is 1, 0, undefined. Sine is 180 is 0. Cosine is negative 1. Now this is the one that's